I stood at the back of the Riverside Country Club ballroom in Denver, Colorado, watching 200 people celebrate my son Brandon's 40th birthday. Crystal chandeliers sparkled overhead, throwing prismatic light across the polished marble floor. A jazz quartet played softly in the corner, their version of Take 5 drifting through conversations about stock options and real estate investments. Waiters in crisp white jackets circulated with champagne flutes and hors d'oeuvres that probably cost more than my monthly disability check. Bacon-wrapped scallops, caviar on tiny toast points, little pastry things I couldn't even identify. And not one person in that room knew I existed. My name is Robert Sullivan. I'm 58 years old and I spent 22 years in the United States Marine Corps. 2 tours in Iraq, 1 in Afghanistan. I came home with shrapnel in my left leg that sets off metal detectors at airports and government buildings. A purple heart I keep in a shoebox under my bed because looking at it reminds me of the 3 guys who didn't make it home, and tinnitus that rings in my ears every quiet moment. I also came home to a son who was 7 years old when I deployed the first time, and 17 when I finally hung up the uniform for good. I thought coming home meant we'd have time. Time to rebuild what war had taken from us. Time to be the father I'd dreamed about being during those endless nights in Fallujah, sitting in a foxhole or on guard duty, imagining what I'd say to my boy when I got back. Time to teach him how to change a tire, how to tie a tie properly, how to be a good man. But Brandon had other plans. Or maybe life just had other plans for both of us. He went to Stanford on a full academic scholarship, got his MBA from Wharton with honors, and built a tech company from nothing that went public 3 years ago. Last I heard, he was worth somewhere north of $80 million. I only knew that because I'd Googled him one night after a few too many beers, sitting alone in my apartment, wondering what my son was doing with his life. The last time I'd actually spoken to my son was 6 months ago, January 14th. I remember the date because it was 2 days after my birthday, which he'd forgotten. Again, 3rd year in a row. I'd called to ask if he wanted to grab lunch, maybe meet at that burger place we used to go to when he was in high school, back before everything got complicated. He'd said he was too busy, investors meeting, board presentation, some crisis with the product launch, always something. Always too busy for the old man who used to carry him on my shoulders through Washington Park, who taught him to ride a bike without training wheels, who missed his entire childhood defending a country he'd grow up to barely acknowledge. After that call, I stopped reaching out, stopped sending the awkward text messages that would sit unread for days before getting a one-word response, stopped leaving voicemails he never returned, stopped pretending we had a relationship when what we really had was a biological connection and nothing else. I figured if my son wanted me in his life, he knew where to find me. I lived in the same 2-bedroom apartment in Aurora I'd moved into after his mother Sarah and I divorced 8 years ago. Same phone number I'd had for 15 years, same email address, same father, just older and more invisible with each passing year. Then, 3 days ago, I got a call from an unknown number. I almost didn't answer. These days, unknown numbers usually meant telemarketers or scammers trying to steal my identity or sell me something I didn't need and couldn't afford. But something made me pick up. A woman's voice, professional and chipper in that way that people who work in fancy offices always sound. Mr. Sullivan, this is Amanda Chen from Brandon Sullivan's executive office. I'm calling to confirm your attendance at Mr. Sullivan's 40th birthday celebration, this Saturday at 7 p.m. at Riverside Country Club. May I confirm you'll be attending? I'd sat there in my recliner, my bum leg propped up on the ottoman, and stared at the phone like it was a grenade with the pin pulled. Executive office. Not even a personal call from Brandon. Not even a text. Just his assistant, probably working through a list, checking boxes on a spreadsheet, making sure all the important people had been contacted. And apparently I was on that list, though I suspected it was more out of obligation than actual desire. Will my son be expecting me? I asked, keeping my voice neutral. There was a pause, a slight hesitation that told me everything I needed to know. You're on the guest list, sir. That's all I can confirm. I should have said no right then. Should have told her politely that I had other plans. Couldn't make it. Thanks for thinking of me. But something in me, some stubborn Marine Corps part that never learned when to retreat, that never learned when a battle was already lost, said, yes, I'll be there. "Are there any dietary restrictions I should note?" she asked, all business now that she'd gotten her confirmation. "No, ma'am. I eat whatever's put in front of me." "Excellent. We'll see you Saturday evening. The dress code is formal." She hung up before I could ask what formal meant exactly. I owned one suit, a 15-year-old navy blue number I'd bought at Men's Warehouse for a funeral. It still fit, mostly, though it was a little tight in the shoulders and a little loose in the waist. Age does strange things to a body, especially one that's been through what mine has. So there I was on Saturday night, standing at the back of a ballroom that probably cost more to rent for one evening than I paid in rent for 6 months, wearing my old suit that showed its age in the harsh light. My dress shoes were polished until they shined, but you could see the cracks in the leather if you looked close enough. My tie was straight, but outdated, the pattern something from another decade. I looked exactly like what I was, a working-class veteran at a party for millionaires and tech executives who'd never spent a day in uniform, who'd never missed a meal or wondered how they'd pay for their medications. I'd arrived at 6:45, 15 minutes early like the Marines taught me. Early is on time is late, and late is unacceptable. I told the valet I'd park my own car. My 2008 Honda Civic with the dented rear bumper and the VA hospital parking stickers didn't belong in a line of Teslas and BMWs, and one Bentley that probably cost more than I'd earn in my entire lifetime. The valet had looked relieved, honestly, like he was grateful not to have to touch my beat-up old car. I'd walked in through the main entrance, past marble columns and crystal sconces, feeling more out of place with every step. I gave my name to the hostess, a young woman in a black dress who couldn't have been more than 25. She scanned her tablet twice, frowning slightly, before finding my name at the very bottom of the list. She handed me a name tag without making eye contact and gestured vaguely toward the ballroom down the hall. For the past hour and 15 minutes I'd been invisible. I'd positioned myself near the bar, nursing a single beer because even the drinks were expensive here and I didn't want to seem like a freeloader. I watched my son work the room like the CEO he was. Brandon looked good. Better than good, actually. He wore an expensive suit that fit him perfectly, tailored to his frame. His hair was styled just right, that artful, messy look that probably took 20 minutes and cost $50. He had a confident handshake, a winning smile, the kind of presence that made people want to listen when he spoke. He was talking to investors, laughing with executives, posing for photos with his wife Natasha and their 2 kids, Dylan and Sophie. My grandchildren, kids I'd never met in person, only seen in Christmas cards that arrived late and felt obligatory. The kind of cards you send because you're supposed to, not because you want to. Generic messages, wishing you joy this holiday season. The Sullivans. No personal note. No photo of just the kids. Just a professional family portrait that looked like it belonged in a real estate brochure. I watched Sophie, who must have been about 6 now, twirl in her pink dress. She had Sarah's smile, my late wife's eyes. It hurt to look at her and see the grandmother she'd never really know. Sarah had died 4 years ago, and Brandon had called to tell me the day after the funeral. Not to invite me, just to inform me it had happened. "Your mother passed away. We had a small service, I thought you should know." I watched Dylan, maybe 9 years old, stand awkwardly beside his father, uncomfortable in his little suit and tie. He kept tugging at his collar, the way boys do when they're not used to formal clothes. He had Brandon's serious expression, that furrowed brow that meant he was thinking hard about something. I wondered what he was thinking. I wondered if he even knew his grandfather existed. Not once in that hour and 15 minutes did Brandon look my way. Not once did his eyes scan the room and land on his father standing alone at the back, holding a beer that had gone warm. I could have been a ghost, a figment of imagination, and maybe to him I was. Maybe I'd been a ghost for years and I'd just been too stubborn or too hopeful to admit it. The speeches started at 8:30. Brandon's business partner, a guy named Marcus Webb who looked like he'd stepped out of a Silicon Valley recruiting poster, took the microphone first. He was tall, confident, wearing glasses that probably cost more than my monthly pension. He told a story about how Brandon had pitched the company idea on a napkin at a Starbucks 5 years ago, how Marcus had thought he was crazy, how they'd maxed out their credit cards and worked out of Marcus's garage and eaten ramen for months, how Brandon's vision and determination had turned that napkin sketch into a $100 million business. Everyone laughed and applauded, Someone shouted, "Here's to crazy ideas." Then Natasha went up. She was beautiful in that polished, expensive way. Designer dress, professional makeup, hair that had definitely been done at a salon that afternoon. She talked about what an amazing husband and father Brandon was, how he balanced work and family, how he never missed Dylan's baseball games or Sophie's dance recitals, how lucky they all were to have him, how he made her life better every single day. More applause. Someone wiped away a tear. Then Brandon's college roommate, a guy named Jeremy, who kept making inside jokes nobody else understood, told a story about spring break in Cabo when they were juniors. Something about tequila and a donkey and Brandon talking their way out of jail. Everyone laughed. Then Brandon's first investor, a silver-haired man who looked like he owned half of Colorado, talked about Brandon's vision and drive, his ability to see opportunities where others saw obstacles. Then his mentor from Stanford, a professor who'd clearly made this speech many times before, talked about Brandon's brilliance, his innovative thinking, his natural leadership abilities. One speech after another, each one painting a picture of Brandon as some kind of self-made genius who'd emerged fully formed from nothing, a man who'd built himself from scratch, a titan of industry, a loving husband, a devoted father, a loyal friend, a visionary leader. Not one person mentioned that Brandon had a father. Not one speech acknowledged where he'd come from or who had raised him. Not one story included me. It was like I didn't exist. Like Brandon had sprung fully formed from the mind of Zeus. No history, no roots, no old man, who'd walked the floor with him when he was colicky as a baby, who'd helped him with his algebra homework, who'd taught him how to throw a spiral, who'd held him when his mother got sick. I thought about Sarah. She'd been gone 4 years, but it felt like yesterday. Breast cancer. She'd fought it for 3 years, and I'd been there for every chemo session, every doctor's appointment, every dark night when she was sure she wouldn't make it. We'd been divorced by then, had been for 4 years, but that didn't matter. She was still my family, still the mother of my son, and in those final months we'd grown close again in a way we hadn't been since before my first deployment. She would have hated this party. She would have been horrified to see Brandon pretend his family didn't exist, just to maintain some polished image of success. Sarah had always been the one who kept us connected during my deployments. She'd made sure Brandon wrote me letters, decorated them with stickers and drawings. She'd held the family together when I couldn't be there, when I was halfway around the world. And now she was gone, and without her as the glue, Brandon and I had just drifted apart like 2 ships passing in the night, getting further and further away until we couldn't even see each other anymore. That's when something inside me shifted. Not anger exactly, though there was some of that bubbling under the surface. Not even hurt, though God knows there was plenty of that, accumulated over years of neglect and silence. It was something else. Clarity, maybe. The realization that if I walked out of that ballroom right now, it might be months before Brandon even noticed I'd been there. Or maybe he wouldn't notice at all. Maybe I'd just become another name on a guest list that his assistant had compiled, another obligation fulfilled and forgotten, another box checked. I finished my beer, the last warm swallow bitter on my tongue, and set the bottle on a passing waiter's tray. He didn't even look at me. I walked toward the stage, weaving through tables of people I didn't know, past conversations about acquisitions and market caps and things I didn't understand. My leg ached from standing so long, the shrapnel grinding against bone with every step, but I fought the limp. Marines don't limp. Marines don't show weakness even when they're walking into what might be the biggest mistake of their life. The current speaker, some guy from Brandon's board of directors wearing a bow tie and suspenders, was wrapping up his speech. He was talking about Brandon's leadership style, his innovative thinking, his commitment to excellence, his ability to inspire his team. All the corporate buzzwords that sounded impressive but meant nothing when you got right down to it. Just empty phrases people use when they want to sound smart. I waited at the base of the stage steps. When he finished and started to descend, I moved past him and climbed up. A few people noticed. I heard a murmur ripple through the crowd, like wind through wheat. Someone near the front said, "Who's that?" Someone else said, "I don't know." Security? I took the microphone from its stand. The room wasn't completely quiet yet. Conversations continued in pockets. Glasses clinked. Someone laughed at a private joke. Someone else was on their phone, probably checking stock prices or emails. I cleared my throat and tapped the microphone twice. The sound echoed through the speakers like distant thunder, and finally, gradually, the room fell silent. "Good evening. My name is Robert Sullivan. I'm Brandon's father." The room went completely silent now, the kind of silence that's almost physical, that presses against your eardrums. 200 faces turned toward me like flowers following the sun. I found Brandon in the crowd. He was standing near the head table, his face frozen in an expression I couldn't quite read. Surprise? Embarrassment? Fear? Horror? Maybe all of them mixed together. Natasha's hand was on his arm, her perfectly manicured nails digging into his expensive suit jacket. She was whispering something urgent, but he wasn't responding. He was just staring at me like he'd seen a ghost. "I haven't heard from my son in 6 months," I continued. My voice was steady, calm, the same tone I'd used to brief my unit before missions. The tone that said I knew exactly what I was doing, even when I didn't. Before tonight, the last time we spoke was for about 90 seconds on the phone. He was too busy for lunch, too busy for a conversation, too busy for his old man. I could see Natasha whispering something more insistent now. A few people shifted uncomfortably in their seats, their chairs scraping against the floor. Some looked at each other with confused expressions, silently asking if this was part of the program. Others stared at me with a mixture of curiosity and discomfort, like they'd stumbled onto something private that they shouldn't be witnessing. Good. They should be uncomfortable. They should feel something other than self-satisfaction and champagne buzz. "I'm not here to embarrass anyone," I said, though that was probably a lie. I wasn't sure what I was there to do, honestly. I was making this up as I went along. I'm not here to cause a scene. I'm here because I was invited, believe it or not. Someone in Brandon's office sent me an invitation, and I thought, maybe after 6 months of silence, my son actually wants me in his life again. Maybe he's ready to remember where he came from. Maybe 40 years old is when a man finally figures out that his father won't be around forever. I paused, looking around the room. All these successful people in their designer clothes, their expensive jewelry, their Rolex watches and diamond earrings, their carefully cultivated networks and strategic friendships. How many of them had someone like me in their past? Someone they'd outgrown, someone who didn't fit the narrative of their success, someone who reminded them that they hadn't always been rich and powerful and important, someone who'd changed their diapers and wiped their noses and stayed up all night when they had nightmares. A lot of you probably don't know this, I continued, but I served 22 years in the United States Marine Corps. I was deployed when Brandon was in elementary school, middle school, high school. I missed his soccer games, his school plays, his 8th grade graduation. I was in Fallujah during his junior prom. I was in Kandahar when he got accepted to Stanford. And when I came home, when I finally hung up my uniform and tried to figure out who I was without it, I tried to make up for lost time. I tried to be present. But by then, he was already halfway out the door to his big life, his important life. His life that didn't have room for a broken-down old Marine with a bum leg and nightmares. I looked directly at Brandon. He still wasn't meeting my eyes. He was staring at the floor now, his jaw so tight, I could see the muscle jumping. His hands were clenched into fists at his sides. "I'm proud of you, son. I want you to know that. I mean it. I'm proud of what you've built. This company, this life, this family. It's more than I ever dreamed of having. More than most people ever achieve in 2 lifetimes. You're brilliant and driven and successful, and none of that came from me. That's all you. Your intelligence, your work ethic, your vision. That's all Brandon Sullivan. I can't take credit for any of it. Some people thought I was building to something positive now. I could see a few smiles starting to form, some nods of appreciation. They thought this was going to be a touching moment of reconciliation, a heartwarming speech from a proud father who'd come to celebrate his son's achievements. They thought this was going to end with a hug and tears and everyone feeling good about themselves. They were wrong. But here's what I want everyone in this room to understand. Success doesn't erase history. Money doesn't replace relationships. And no amount of achievement makes it okay to forget the people who loved you before you were worth $80 million. No amount of success makes it okay to ignore your father for 6 months, to forget his birthday 3 years running, to send him a Christmas card with no personal message, to make him feel like he's an embarrassment, a liability, something to be hidden away. The smiles disappeared. The room was absolutely silent now. Someone's phone buzzed, and they scrambled to silence it, the sound obscenely loud in the quiet. You could have heard a pin drop on that plush carpet. You could have heard a heartbeat. Brandon, you've given speeches tonight about values, about vision, about building something that matters. But I'm standing here, your father, a man you haven't called in half a year, and I'm wondering what values you're actually teaching your kids. I'm wondering what Dylan and Sophie think family means when their grandfather is a stranger at the back of the room, someone they wave to politely in a Christmas card photo, but never actually meet. I'm wondering what lessons they're learning about loyalty and gratitude and remembering where you came from. I saw Natasha lean down to whisper to Sophie, who was staring at me with wide, confused eyes. The little girl looked scared, like she didn't understand what was happening. Dylan had turned to look at his father, his young face full of questions that nobody was answering. Why is that man crying, Daddy? Who is he? Why is he talking about us? I didn't come here for money. I don't want your money, Brandon, I never have. I didn't come here for an apology, though God knows you owe me one. You owe me about 8 years' worth of apologies, actually. I came here because I'm your father, and despite everything, despite 6 months of silence and years of distance, and all the ways you've made it clear I don't fit into your new life, I still hold out hope. I'm a stubborn old fool, and I still hold out hope that somewhere under all this success and all these expensive suits, and all this talk about vision and values, there's still the kid who used to wait by the window for me to come home on leave. The kid who wrote me letters when I was overseas, who drew pictures of us playing catch in the yard, who signed them Love Brandon with a backwards N because he hadn't learned to write properly yet. The kid who told me he wanted to be just like me when he grew up. My voice cracked on that last part. I hadn't planned on getting emotional. I'd planned on being strong, being Marine Corps tough, saying my piece and walking out with my head high. But there it was. 22 years of service, 8 years of divorce, 6 months of silence. Years of feeling invisible and unwanted and unnecessary. And here I was, 58 years old, crying in front of 200 strangers at my son's birthday party. But I didn't stop. I couldn't stop now. I'd come this far. I'd climbed onto this stage. I might as well finish what I started. I'm 58 years old. I've got shrapnel in my leg that aches when it rains and aches worse when it doesn't. I've got nightmares I don't talk about because nobody wants to hear about the things I saw in Fallujah, the things I had to do, the friends I lost. I've got tinnitus that never stops, a ringing in my ears that reminds me every single second of every single day what I sacrificed. I live on disability and a pension that adds up to about $1,800 a month. I live in a 2-bedroom apartment in Aurora, where the heat doesn't work right, and the neighbors are loud and the parking lot gets broken into twice a year. So I drive a beat-up Honda, with almost 200,000 miles on it, that I keep running with duct tape and prayers and YouTube videos, because I can't afford to take it to a real mechanic. I'm not rich. I'm not successful by the standards of this room. Hell, I'm probably poor by the standards of this room, but I'm your father, and that used to mean something. That used to matter. I looked around the room one more time, making eye contact with as many people as I could. I wanted them to see me. To really see me. Not as an embarrassment or an inconvenience or an old man who'd had too much to drink and decided to make a scene, but as a human being, as a father who'd given everything he had and been cast aside when he was no longer useful, as someone who deserved basic dignity and respect. You know what the worst part is? I continued, looking back at Brandon. It's not the silence. Silence I can handle. I spent months in the desert with nothing but silence. It's not even the rejection. I've been rejected before. It's watching my son become someone I don't recognize, someone who values appearance over authenticity, someone who would rather pretend he has no past than acknowledge the people who shaped him, someone who's so concerned with his image, with his brand, with what people think of him, that he's forgotten how to be a decent human being. I saw someone in the front row wipe their eyes, a woman I didn't recognize, probably someone from Brandon's company crying quietly into her napkin. A man near the back had his arm around his elderly father, an old man who must have been in his 80s, pulling him close like he was afraid he'd disappear. Your mother, God rest her soul, would be heartbroken to see this. She spent years holding our family together while I was deployed, years making excuses for my absence, years telling you stories about me so you wouldn't forget who I was, so you'd understand that Just because I wasn't there didn't mean I didn't love you. She sacrificed everything to give you a good life. She worked 2 jobs when I was overseas, so you could have soccer cleats and school supplies and birthday parties with your friends. She stayed up late helping you with homework. She drove you to every practice and every game. She was both parents for years at a time. And this is how you honor her memory, by erasing both of us from your success story, by pretending you came from nothing when you came from people who loved you more than their own lives. Brandon's face had gone pale. Several people in the audience were crying now. I saw one woman, someone I didn't recognize, dabbing her eyes with a cloth napkin, her mascara running down her cheeks. A man near the back had his head in his hands. Another man was staring at Brandon with something that looked like disappointment or maybe recognition, like he was seeing something in Brandon that he didn't like. I'm not asking for much, Brandon. I'm really not. I'm not asking you to support me financially. I've got my pension and my disability and I manage. I'm not asking you to give me a job in your fancy company or buy me a new car or move me into some expensive condo. I'm not asking you to introduce me to your investors or put my photo in your office or mention me in your speeches. I'm just asking you to remember that I exist, to call once in a while, to let me meet my grandchildren properly, not as a stranger at the back of a ballroom, to treat me like I'm a person who matters, not a ghost from a past you'd rather forget. I set the microphone back in its stand carefully, my hands shaking slightly. The room was so quiet it felt like the silence might suffocate me. I looked at Brandon one last time. He still hadn't looked up, still hadn't met my eyes. Happy birthday, son. I hope it's everything you wanted. I hope it was worth it. Then I walked off that stage. My leg was screaming by the time I reached the floor, the shrapnel grinding with every step, sending shooting pains up my thigh. But I didn't let it show. I kept my shoulders back and my head up. Marines don't show weakness. Marines don't limp. Marines walk tall even when they're falling apart inside. I walked through that silent ballroom, past all those frozen faces, past the grandchildren who didn't know me, past the son who'd forgotten me, past all the success and wealth and achievement that had somehow made me irrelevant. The cool Colorado night air hit my face when I stepped outside, and I realized I was crying. Really crying now, not just tearing up, full-on sobbing. The valet brought my Honda around without a word. Maybe he'd heard what happened inside. Maybe someone had texted him, or maybe he just saw an old man crying and knew better than to ask questions. I tipped him $5, all the cash I had in my wallet, and drove home through the dark streets of Denver, through neighborhoods that got progressively cheaper and less maintained. I didn't cry the whole way home. About halfway there, the tears stopped, and I just felt numb, empty. Like I'd used up all my emotions on that stage and had nothing left. I thought about turning on the radio, but couldn't handle the cheerful songs or the talk show hosts making jokes. I just drove in silence, the ringing in my ears the only soundtrack. When I got back to my apartment, I sat in my car in the parking lot for 20 minutes, staring at the building. A few lights were on in various units. Someone's TV flickered blue through their curtains. Someone else was on their balcony smoking a cigarette. Normal people living normal lives. Nobody in that building had just humiliated themselves in front of 200 people. Nobody in that building had just burned their relationship with their only child to the ground. Finally, I went inside, climbed the stairs to the second floor because the elevator was broken again, unlocked my door and stepped into my small apartment. It looked the same as always, the worn recliner facing the TV. The simple decorations, mostly military memorabilia and a few photos of Brandon as a kid. The medications lined up on the kitchen counter, the VA hospital paperwork scattered on the table. My whole life fit into 2 bedrooms, and I'd just made it even smaller. I sat in my recliner in the dark, didn't even turn on the lights, and I let myself feel everything I'd been holding back. The hurt, the disappointment, the grief for what we used to have and would probably never have again. The fear that I'd just made everything worse instead of better. The shame of breaking down in public. The terrible crushing loneliness of being a father whose son doesn't want him. I must have fallen asleep there eventually because the next thing I knew, sunlight was streaming through my windows and someone was knocking on my door. Hard, insistent, the kind of knocking that said they weren't going away. I looked at the clock on my microwave. 9:07 a.m. I'd been asleep for maybe 5 hours. My leg was stiff from sleeping in the chair. My back ached. My mouth tasted like something had died in it, but someone was still knocking. I limped to the door and opened it. Brandon stood there. He looked terrible. Still wearing his clothes from the night before, though he'd lost the tie and his shirt was wrinkled and untucked. His eyes were red and swollen. His hair was a mess. He had stubble on his jaw. He looked like he'd been up all night, crying or thinking or both. Maybe driving around like I had. Maybe sitting in his car in a parking lot wondering what the hell to do now. We stared at each other for a long moment. I didn't say anything. Didn't invite him in, didn't slam the door in his face, just waited to see what he'd come here to say. If he was here to yell at me, he could yell. If he was here to tell me never to contact him again, he could say that too. I'd already said my piece. The ball was in his court now. "Can I come in?" he asked finally. His voice was hoarse, like he'd been screaming or crying or both. I stepped aside without a word. He walked into my small apartment and I watched him take it all in. Really take it in, maybe for the first time in years. The worn furniture I'd bought second-hand after the divorce because I couldn't afford anything else. The simple decorations, the Marine Corps flag on the wall, the photos of him as a kid that I'd kept even though he never came to visit, the medications lined up on the counter like soldiers in formation, the VA hospital paperwork that documented every appointment, every prescription, every attempt to fix what the war had broken. This was the first time he'd been here in almost 3 years, the first time he'd seen how his father actually lived. He stood in the middle of my small living room for a moment, just looking around. Then he walked to where I had the photos displayed on a small bookshelf. Photos of him as a baby, as a toddler, his first day of kindergarten, Little League, his high school graduation, me in my dress blues standing next to him, both of us smiling. That was taken 2 weeks before I deployed to Afghanistan, before everything got complicated. He picked up one photo, him at maybe age 5, sitting on my shoulders at the zoo. We're both laughing at something, probably one of the monkeys. Sarah had taken that photo. I remembered that day clearly. It was one of the good ones, before the deployments got longer and more frequent, before the war changed me into someone harder and less present. "Dad," he said, still holding the photo. Then he stopped, set it down carefully, tried again. "I don't know where to begin." "The beginning usually works," I said. My voice was flat, emotionless. I wasn't trying to be cruel or cold. I just didn't have the energy for anything else. I was tired, so damn tired. He laughed, but it was hollow, bitter, the laugh of someone who's just realized how badly they've screwed up. "When did we stop talking? Like really talking, not just those awkward phone calls where I tell you I'm busy and you say you understand." "About 8 years ago," I said. "Right around the time your mother and I split up. You were finishing Stanford, about to start at Wharton. You were angry at both of us, but especially me. You blamed me for the divorce, said I was never home anyway, so what difference did it make if we were married or not? Said Mom had basically been a single parent for your whole childhood, and she deserved better. You weren't wrong about any of it." He flinched like I'd hit him, like the words were physical. "I said that, really said that. You said a lot of things, most of them true, painful but true. I wasn't home. I was deployed more than I was stateside. Your mother deserved better than a part-time husband who came home different every time, harder, more distant, more prone to nightmares and anger. And you deserved better than a part-time father who missed every important moment. You weren't wrong to be angry. You weren't wrong about any of it. But I was wrong about something else," Brandon said quietly, turning away from the photos to look at me. "I was wrong to blame you for serving. I was wrong to punish you for doing what you thought was right, for doing your duty. And I was wrong to spend the last 8 years proving I didn't need you, proving I could be successful without you, proving that I was better off without my father in my life. Is that what you've been doing?" I asked. He looked up at me and I saw tears running down his face. "Honestly, I don't know. Maybe. Probably. I built this company, this life. And I told myself I did it all on my own, self-made, no help. Just me and my brain and my work ethic, the classic American success story, right? Poor kid makes good. Except I wasn't poor. I had parents who loved me. I had a father who paid for my SAT prep course when Mum was sick and couldn't work, who helped me buy my first car, who taught me that discipline and hard work matter, that you show up even when it's hard, that you finish what you start. But I convinced myself I'd learned all that despite you instead of because of you. I turned you into the villain of my story, so I could be the hero. I didn't say anything. There was more he needed to get out, and I could tell he was working up to something. Last night after you left, he continued, it was absolute chaos. Natasha was furious with me. She said I'd humiliated her, humiliated us by letting you stand up there and air our family business in front of everyone important in my professional life. She said half the board was texting her, asking what the hell that was about. She said Marcus's wife was asking if I was really that horrible to my own father. She wanted me to make excuses, call people, do damage control, explain that you were being dramatic, that our relationship was more complicated than you made it sound. And what did you say? I said she was right, that I was that horrible, that everything you said was true and I had no defense for any of it. He walked over to my couch and sat down heavily, like his legs couldn't hold him up anymore. He put his head in his hands. But Dylan, he said, his voice muffled, Dylan asked me a question that I couldn't answer, that I still can't answer. What did he ask? Brandon looked up at me, tears streaming down his face. He asked, is that really Grandpa? That man who was crying on stage, and I had to say yes. And then he asked, why didn't we say hi to him? Why didn't he sit with us at our table? Why was he standing all alone in the back? Why does he look so sad? And I couldn't answer, Dad. I literally could not come up with an answer that made sense to a 9-year-old kid who just wanted to understand why his grandfather was a stranger. So I just said, because Daddy made terrible mistakes and hurt someone I love. I felt something crack inside my chest. Not break completely, just crack, like ice on a lake in early spring, the first sign that maybe things could start to thaw. And Sophie, Brandon continued. Sophie asked if she could meet you. She said you looked sad, and she wanted to give you a hug because that's what Mommy taught her to do when someone is sad. She's 6 years old, Dad. 6. And she has more empathy and basic human decency than I've shown in 6 months. Hell, in 6 years, maybe longer. He stood up and walked to my window, looking out at the parking lot below, at my beat-up Honda parked between an old Toyota and a rusted Ford truck, at the other apartments, the people living their lives, just ordinary people with ordinary problems, nothing glamorous or impressive or worthy of a magazine profile. Everything I thought would make me happy, he said quietly. The money, the success, the recognition, the respect, it doesn't mean anything if I'm teaching my kids that family is disposable, that people are only valuable if they're useful, if they can do something for you. That's not who I want to be, Dad. That's not the man I want Dylan to become. That's not the example I want to set for Sophie. And that's not what Mom would have wanted me to become. Your mother, I said carefully, would be proud of your success. She always believed you were capable of great things. Even when you were little, she'd say, that boy is going to change the world someday. And she was right. But you're also right. She wouldn't be proud of how you got there. She wouldn't be proud of you forgetting where you came from. She wouldn't be proud of you treating your father like he's an embarrassment to be hidden away. Your mother always said family first. Always. Even when I was gone. Even when she was raising you mostly alone. Even when it would have been easier to be bitter and angry. She never let you think I didn't matter. She never let you forget that I loved you, even from halfway around the world. I need to make this right, Brandon said, turning back to me with something like desperation in his eyes. I don't know how, but I need to. Tell me how. Tell me what I need to do. You start by showing up, I said simply. Not with money, though God knows money would help with my medical bills. Not with grand gestures or expensive gifts or trying to fix everything at once. You show up. You call. You visit. You introduce me to my grandchildren properly, not as a surprise guest at a party, but as their grandfather who wants to know them, who wants to be part of their lives. You treat me like I'm part of your life instead of a photo you scroll past on your phone, instead of a name you feel guilty about once or twice a year. What if it's too late? What if I've screwed this up too badly? It's not too late. It's never too late as long as we're both still breathing. But Brandon, I need you to understand something. I need you to really hear this. I can't keep doing this. I can't keep being the one who reaches out only to be ignored. I can't keep hoping you'll remember my birthday or call me on Christmas or invite me to Dylan's baseball games. If you want a relationship with me, you have to want it. You have to put in the work. I've done my time waiting. I've done my time hoping. The ball's in your court now. He walked over to where I was standing. He looked at me for a long moment, really looked at me, maybe for the first time in years. Saw the lines on my face, the grey in my hair, the way I favored my left leg. Saw that I'd gotten older while he wasn't paying attention, that I wouldn't be around forever. Then he knelt down. My grown son, the CEO of a $100 million company, knelt down in front of me in my crappy apartment in Aurora. I'm sorry, Dad, I'm so sorry for all of it. For the silence, for the missed birthdays, for the anger. For pretending you didn't exist, because it was easier than dealing with the complicated feelings I had about your service, about the divorce, about growing up without you there for all the big moments. I'm sorry for not calling you when Mum died, for not letting you be part of saying goodbye to her. I'm sorry for not inviting you to Dylan's baptism or Sophie's first day of school or any of the 1,000 moments when you should have been there. I'm sorry for making you feel like you don't matter when you're the only parent I have left in this world. I reached down and pulled him to his feet. My leg screamed in protest, but I ignored it. I put both hands on his shoulders, the way I'd done when he was 7 and crying about a bully at school, when he was 12 and upset about not making the baseball team, when he was 17 and scared about leaving for college. You were a kid who needed his father, and I wasn't there, I said. That's on me. I made choices I thought were right at the time, and those choices had consequences. But you're a grown man now, Brandon. You're 40 years old. You get to decide what happens next. You can keep punishing me for the past, keep holding on to that anger and resentment, or you can figure out how to build something new, something better. I'm not going anywhere. I'll be here, in this apartment, living my simple life. But if you want me in yours, if you really want that, you're going to have to make room for me. Not as an obligation, not as a box to check on your list of things a good son should do, but as your father. I want that, he said, his voice breaking. I do. I want my kids to know their grandfather. I want to know you again, not as the memory of who you were, but as who you are now. I want to make up for lost time, even though I know I can't really do that. I just want a chance to try. Then show up, I said. That's all I'm asking. Show up. He grabbed me then, pulled me into a hug that I hadn't felt in years. Not since before Sarah died, maybe. Not since before everything got so complicated. He was taller than me now, broader in the shoulders, successful and powerful in all the ways I'd never been. But in that moment, he was just my son, my boy. Broken, and trying to find his way back home. We stood there for a long time, 2 men crying in a crappy apartment in Aurora, Colorado, trying to figure out how to be father and son again after years of pretending we didn't need each other, trying to bridge a gap that had seemed impossible just 24 hours ago. When can I bring the kids by? He asked finally, pulling away and wiping his eyes. They really do want to meet you. Sophie hasn't stopped talking about the sad grandpa who gave the speech. She drew you a picture this morning. She drew me a picture. A rainbow. She said rainbows make people happy when they're sad. Can I bring them tomorrow? Or is that too soon? Tomorrow would be good, I said. Tomorrow would be perfect. He left a few minutes later after we'd planned a time and after he'd looked around my apartment one more time, really seeing it, really understanding how I lived. As he was leaving, he turned back. Dad? One more thing. Natasha wants to apologize. She didn't realize how bad things had gotten between us. She thought I was just busy, not deliberately avoiding you. She feels terrible. She doesn't need to apologize to me. She didn't do anything wrong. She was part of it. We both were. We created this life that didn't have room for you in it, and that was wrong. So she wants to say that. And I think you should let her. We all need to start over here, and that means being honest about the mistakes we've all made. All right, bring her tomorrow too. After he left, I sat back in my recliner and stared at the ceiling for a long time. I didn't know if this would last. Didn't know if Brandon would really follow through, or if this was just guilt talking. Didn't know if we could really rebuild something from the wreckage of what we'd lost. But for the first time in 6 months, maybe longer, I felt something like hope. That was 10 months ago, almost a year now since the birthday party that changed everything, and Brandon did follow through. He showed up the next day with Dylan and Sophie and Natasha, all of them nervous and unsure how this would go. Sophie had indeed drawn me a rainbow, complete with clouds and sunshine and stick figures that she said were her family, including a new stick figure with a cane that was me. It's on my refrigerator now, held up with a magnet shaped like the Marine Corps emblem that Dylan gave me. That first visit was awkward. The kids were shy. Dylan shook my hand formally, like I was a stranger, because I was. Sophie hid behind Natasha's leg, but I'd been in worse situations. I'd been in firefights and ambushes. I could handle 2 nervous grandkids. I told them stories. That's what old guys do, right? I told Sophie about the time her dad tried to build a treehouse when he was 8 and ended up stuck in the tree crying for help. She thought that was hilarious. I told Dylan about the time Brandon brought home a stray dog and tried to hide it in his closet for 3 days before Sarah found it. Dylan laughed at that one. And slowly, over the course of that afternoon, they started to warm up. Sophie sat on my lap and asked questions. "Why do you walk funny? Does your leg hurt?" "Why were you crying at Daddy's party?" I answered honestly. "Yes, my leg hurts sometimes. I was crying because I missed your daddy and he didn't call me." She considered that, then gave me a hug. "I'm sorry you were sad, Grandpa." "Grandpa." She called me Grandpa. Just like that. Dylan was more reserved, more like Brandon had been at that age, but he was fascinated by my service. He asked careful questions about the Marines, about what it was like, about whether I'd been scared. I told him the truth. Not the sanitized, heroic version you see in movies, the real truth. That war is terrible and necessary and complicated all at the same time. That I'd done things I was proud of and things that still kept me up at night. That I'd lost friends I still thought about every day. That I'd come home changed in ways I was still trying to understand. "Were you brave?" he asked. "I don't know about brave," I said. "Scared, definitely, every single day, but courage isn't about not being scared. It's about being scared and doing what needs to be done anyway." "Is that what you did?" "That's what I tried to do, buddy." After that first visit, they started coming regularly. Every Sunday afternoon it became routine. Brandon would call on Sunday morning to confirm the time, and then they'd all show up around 2. Sometimes we'd order pizza. Sometimes Natasha would bring homemade food. Sometimes we'd just eat sandwiches and chips on paper plates. But every Sunday they showed up, and slowly, carefully, we started to build something new. I went to Dylan's Little League games, sat in the aluminum bleachers that made my leg ache, but I didn't care. I watched my grandson play third base. He wasn't particularly good, missed more ground balls than he caught, struck out more than he got hits. But in the 4th game I went to, he finally got a solid hit. Just a single, nothing spectacular, but you'd have thought he'd hit a home run the way he grinned. He ran to first base, and before the next pitch, he looked up into the stands and found me. He waved. At me, his grandfather. And I waved back, my chest so full I could barely breathe. After the game, we all went out for pizza at Giovanni's. It became our tradition. After every game, win or lose, we'd go to Giovanni's and eat greasy pizza and garlic bread that could kill you. We'd cram into a booth, 5 of us, 3 generations, and we'd talk and laugh, and Dylan would tell terrible jokes he'd learned at school, and Sophie would get tomato sauce all over her face. I went to Sophie's dance recital, watched her do a ballet number to music from the Nutcracker. She was in the back row and missed half the steps, but she was smiling the whole time. Afterward, she ran to me and asked if I saw her. I told her she was the best one up there. She beamed. Brandon started calling me twice a week. Sunday mornings became our regular time, but he'd also call on Wednesdays just to talk. About work sometimes, about the kids, about nothing in particular, just checking in, just remembering that his father existed. In April, Brandon called me on a Tuesday afternoon. Not a Sunday, not a Wednesday, which meant something was up. "Dad, I need your advice on something. What's going on? The company's doing really well, better than we projected. We're looking at a major acquisition that could triple our size overnight, but it would mean a lot more travel, a lot more time away from home. Months at a time, maybe. International offices to set up. I'd basically be living on airplanes for the next 2 years. And I keep thinking about what you said, about showing up, about not letting success replace relationships, about how your kids are only young once. What do you want to do? Honestly, I want to walk away from the acquisition, tell the board no. But that's not what CEOs do. CEOs are supposed to prioritize growth. They're supposed to make the tough calls. You want to know what I think? That's why I'm calling. I leaned back in my recliner, thinking about all the times I'd chosen duty over family, all the deployments I'd volunteered for, All the times I'd extended my tour because the mission needed me, because there was always one more objective, one more firefight, one more month that turned into 6 more months. I'd thought I was serving something bigger than myself. And I was. But I'd also been running from something, from the hard work of being present, from the messy, difficult, mundane work of being a husband and father, from the fear that maybe I wasn't good enough at those things. What matters more to you? I asked. The acquisition or watching Dylan hit his first home run? What matters more, tripling your company or being there when Sophie loses her first tooth? That's not fair, Dad. It's not that simple. Actually, it is. I'm not saying don't grow the company. I'm not saying don't be successful. But I am saying you need to decide what kind of man you want to be. What kind of father? Because your kids are only young once. Sophie's 6. Dylan's 9. In 10 years, they'll be teenagers who don't want to hang out with you anyway. In 15 years, they'll be off to college building their own lives. You've got right now, Brandon. That's all any of us ever have. Right now, this moment. And you can't get it back once it's gone. He was quiet for a long time. I could hear him breathing on the other end of the line, thinking, processing. Finally, he said, "You're right. What are you going to do?" "I don't know yet, but I'll figure it out." "And Dad?" "Yeah, thank you." "For what?" "For being here. For answering the phone. For giving me advice even though I spent years ignoring yours. For not giving up on me even when I'd given up on you. For loving me enough to humiliate yourself at my birthday party, because it was the only way to wake me up. That's what fathers do, son. We stick around, even when we're not wanted. Especially then. The acquisition fell through, or rather Brandon walked away from it. He told me later that the board was furious. 3 members resigned. Some of his investors called him weak, said he was letting his personal life interfere with business decisions. One of them actually said that Brandon was putting his family before the company, like that was a character flaw. But Brandon stood firm. He told them his family wasn't negotiable, that he'd watched his own father sacrifice everything for his career and he wasn't going to make the same mistakes. That if they couldn't support that decision, they could find another CEO. Nobody walked. The company survived. And more importantly, Brandon could still coach Dylan's Little League team, could still make it to Sophie's dance recitals, could still have dinner with his family most nights, could still call his father twice a week. In July, Brandon invited me to a barbecue at his house. Not just me. A real party. Friends, colleagues, neighbors, maybe 40 or 50 people. I almost said no. Almost made an excuse. But Brandon had specifically said he wanted me there, that it wouldn't be the same without me. So I went. Wore my best jeans and a button-down shirt, drove my Honda to his house in Cherry Hills, parked it among the Teslas and BMWs without shame this time. When I arrived, Brandon met me at the door. He introduced me to everyone, not as some distant relative, not as an afterthought, but as his father, with pride in his voice that made my chest tight. "This is my dad, Robert Sullivan. He served 22 years in the Marine Corps, 2 tours in Iraq, 1 in Afghanistan. He's tougher than all of us combined. Everything good about me, I learned from him. It wasn't true, not entirely, but it meant everything to hear him say it." We stood on his back patio that evening, watching the sun set over the Front Range. The mountains were purple and gold, the sky streaked with orange and pink. It was the kind of Colorado sunset that makes you understand why people move here and never leave. "I'm sorry it took a public humiliation for me to wake up," Brandon said quietly. "I'm sorry you had to stand up in front of all those people and force me to see what I'd become. That must have been terrifying." "It was," I admitted. "I thought I was ending whatever relationship we had left. Thought I'd never hear from you again. But you did it anyway." "Marines don't retreat," I said with a small smile. He laughed. "Semper Fi, right? Semper Fi." In August we started the foundation together. Brandon had been thinking about it for months, he said. Thinking about how to make his success mean something beyond just making more money. He wanted to do something that mattered, something that would make me proud, something that honored the sacrifice of people like me, the Sullivan Foundation, dedicated to helping veterans transition to civilian life. Housing assistance, job training, mental health support, help navigating the VA bureaucracy, all the things I'd struggled with when I came home, All the things that are so hard when you're trying to figure out who you are without the structure of the military. Brandon put in $5 million as the initial endowment, just wrote the check like it was nothing. We hired a small staff, rented office space in downtown Denver, started reaching out to veteran organizations to understand where the biggest gaps were in services. For the first time since I'd left the Marines, I felt like I was serving something bigger than myself again, like I had a purpose beyond just surviving. And this time I wasn't choosing service over family. I was doing it with family. I worked 3 days a week at the foundation office. That was about all my leg could handle. But it was enough. It was meaningful. It mattered. Dylan started coming by after school sometimes. He'd help stuff envelopes, organize donation drives, put together care packages for homeless veterans. He took it seriously, asked good questions, wanted to understand why people ended up on the streets after serving their country. Sophie made signs for our fundraising events, colorful crayon drawings that said, "Support our heroes," with creative spelling that made everyone smile. She'd stand next to me at events, holding her signs, explaining to anyone who'd listened that her grandpa was a Marine and that we needed to help veterans. Natasha used her connections in Denver's social circles to host charity dinners and auctions. Turned out she was really good at fundraising, at convincing rich people to open their wallets for a good cause. She raised almost $500,000 in the first 6 months. In November, we opened our first veteran housing facility. 12 units in Aurora, not far from my apartment, fully furnished, clean, safe, with on-site counseling and job placement services, a place where veterans could land while they figured out their next steps. We held a ribbon-cutting ceremony. Local politicians showed up, news cameras, a reporter from the Denver Post. I gave a short speech about what it means to serve and what we owe to those who've served. About how nobody who wore the uniform should ever sleep on the street or go hungry or feel forgotten. But the real moment came when Brandon stepped up to the microphone. "I want to thank my father," he said, his voice steady and clear, "for teaching me what service really means. Not just through his 22 years in the Marines, but through his patience with a son who took way too long to figure out what really matters. Dad, this foundation is named after our family, but it exists because of you. Your sacrifice, your example, your refusal to give up on me even when I'd given up on you. Everything we're doing here, every veteran we help, it's a tribute to you and to all the men and women who served alongside you, who gave pieces of themselves so the rest of us could live in safety and freedom." I was crying by the time he finished. So was he. So was half the audience, including a few of the veterans who'd be moving into the new facility. But these were different tears than the ones at his birthday party. These weren't tears of hurt and rejection. These were tears of healing, of reconciliation, of building something better from the broken pieces of what we'd lost. It's December now, almost exactly 1 year since that birthday party that changed everything. Tomorrow is Christmas Eve, and I'm spending it at Brandon's house. Not as an outsider, not as an afterthought, but as family. Natasha's parents are flying in from California, her sister and brother-in-law and their 2 kids, Brandon's business partner Marcus and his family. About 20 people total. It'll be loud and chaotic and probably overwhelming, but I'm looking forward to it more than I've looked forward to anything in years. This morning, Dylan called me. Not Brandon. Dylan. My grandson called me just to talk. He wanted to tell me about a history project he's doing on the Iraq War. Asked if he could interview me, record it for his class. I said yes, of course. We talked for almost an hour about Fallujah, about what it was like being a Marine, about why people serve even when it's dangerous. When we were done, he said something that made me cry. "Grandpa, I'm really glad Dad brought you back into our lives. You're really cool. I'm really cool. A 9-year-old thinks I'm cool." Sophie got on the phone after that, talked my ear off about her Christmas list. She wants a puppy, which Natasha has already vetoed. She wants a new bike, which she's definitely getting, and she wants me to come to her dance recital in February. I told her I wouldn't miss it for the world. She asked if I'd be at their house for Christmas morning too, to watch them open presents. I told her I'd have to check with her dad about that. Then Brandon got on the phone. "Dad, please come for Christmas morning. Be there when the kids wake up. That's what grandparents do, right? Be part of the whole day." "Are you sure? I don't want to intrude on your family time. You're not intruding. You're family. And we want you there. The kids want you there. I want you there. Then I'll be there. I'm sitting in my apartment now. The same worn recliner. The same simple decorations. But everything feels different. Not because my circumstances have changed dramatically. I still live in Aurora. Still drive my old Honda. Still have a bum leg and nightmares and tinnitus. But I'm not invisible anymore. I'm not waiting for phone calls that never come. I'm not wondering if my son remembers I exist. I'm not a ghost haunting my own life. I'm someone's dad again, someone's grandpa, someone who matters. That toast I gave at Brandon's 40th birthday wasn't planned. I didn't write it out, or rehearse it, or think through the consequences. I just stood up and told the truth. And sometimes that's all it takes, the truth spoken clearly without anger or agenda. Just honesty about pain and disappointment and the hope for something better. I won't pretend it was easy. The months after were awkward and hard, filled with conversations neither of us wanted to have but needed to. Rebuilding trust takes time. Learning how to be family again after years of distance isn't something that happens overnight. There were setbacks. Times when old patterns tried to reassert themselves. Times when Brandon got busy and forgot to call. Times when I felt myself pulling back, protecting myself from more hurt. But we kept showing up. Both of us. That was the key. We both kept trying. And slowly, carefully, we built something new from the broken pieces of what we'd lost. Not the relationship we had before, because you can't go back. Time only moves forward. But something different. Something better, maybe. Something built on honesty instead of obligation. If there's anything I've learned in my 58 years, 22 of them in uniform, it's that courage isn't just about combat. It's not just about running toward danger or making split-second decisions under fire or doing your duty when every instinct says to run. Sometimes courage is standing up in a room full of strangers and saying, I matter. I'm here. You can't pretend I don't exist anymore. Sometimes courage is giving your child a second chance, even when they don't necessarily deserve it. And sometimes courage is admitting you were wrong and asking your father for forgiveness. Brandon did that. I did that. And together, we found something I'd thought was lost forever. Tomorrow when I walk into Brandon's house for Christmas Eve, Sophie will run to the door and throw her arms around my legs like she does now every time she sees me. Dylan will want to show me something, probably a new video game or a basketball move he's been practicing. Natasha will hand me a glass of eggnog and thank me for coming, for being part of their family, for giving Brandon the wake-up call he needed. And Brandon, my son, will shake my hand and pull me into a hug and say, Merry Christmas, Dad, I'm glad you're here. And I'll say, me too, son, me too. That's all I ever wanted. To be there, to matter, to be part of their lives in a real way, not as an obligation or an afterthought or a name on a guest list someone else compiled, but as family. It took a toast at a birthday party to get here. It took me standing up and refusing to be invisible anymore, demanding to be seen and recognized and valued for who I am, not for what I can provide or how convenient I am. It took Brandon hitting rock bottom emotionally, realizing what he'd become and deciding he wanted to be better. It took both of us being willing to do the hard, uncomfortable work of forgiveness and rebuilding, but we made it. Against the odds, through the hurt and the silence and the years of distance, we found our way back to each other, and that's worth celebrating. Not just tomorrow at Christmas, but every single day, every phone call, every Sunday dinner, every little league game and dance recital and foundation meeting. Every ordinary moment when I get to be what I've always been, even when nobody was acknowledging it. A father, a grandfather, a Marine who served his country and now gets to serve his family. That's my story. That's how a toast at a birthday party changed everything. Not because I said anything particularly profound or inspiring, not because I had some great plan or knew exactly what I was doing, but because I stood up, because I refused to accept being forgotten, because I demanded to be seen and valued and treated like a human being who matters. And my son, to his credit and his redemption, finally looked up and saw me, really saw me, the way a son should see his father, and he decided I was worth fighting for, worth making changes for, worth showing up for. That's all any of us really want, isn't it? To be seen, to be valued, to know that our presence makes a difference in someone's life, to matter to the people we love. I'm seen now. I matter now. And tomorrow, when I sit around Brandon's table with 3 generations of family, when I hold Sophie on my lap and listen to Dylan's stories and share a meal with my son and his wife, I'll give thanks. Thanks for second chances. Thanks for stubborn hope. Thanks for the courage to speak truth even when it's terrifying. Thanks for the long, hard road that brought us here. Semper Fi doesn't just mean always faithful to the core. It means always faithful to what matters most, to honor, to duty, to family. I'm still serving, just in a different way now, a better way. And it turns out this mission, this work of being a father and grandfather and helping other veterans find their way home, this is the most important mission I've ever been on. And unlike those deployments in Iraq and Afghanistan, this is one mission I'm never walking away from. This is one post I'm holding until my last breath. Because that's what Marines do. We hold the line. We don't retreat. We don't surrender. And we damn sure don't forget the people who matter most.